Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Books and Booze, the series where the Lushes invite indie authors onto our show, where we can hear a piece of their work and talk to them a little bit about writing, ask them questions, get to know them a little bit. I'm going to throw to Dawn to introduce this week's author.
Hi, everyone. Today we have poet Kat. And thank you for joining us today on Books and Booze. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, when you started writing, what's your favorite drink?
Okay, so I'm Kat. My actual name is Katarzyna. I'm originally from Poland, Scotland for the last 17 years. So this is officially my home.
That's amazing.
I have two children. One of them is 15. They're both boys. So quite a handful. Quite a handful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, so I'm an indie poet. Introduced me. I'm also, however, the classroom assistant. So I work with lots of kids in a very noisy school. Playground duty, lunch duty, whatever is needed. But I think the best part of my job is really in children. I don't mind the noise, and all the voices.
Yeah, I'm used to it too.
Yeah, I know. We all have kids, and yeah, it gets loud.
Yeah.
Awesome. How long have you been writing poems for?
So I wrote was about when I was about 7 years old, and it was what I could the haiku, but I had, of course, no idea what different types of poetry were. And it was about, I think I still have it somewhere. My mom has it, somewhere as a kid. And so now I've been writing for about 33 years as I'm.
Nice.
So, yeah. And it started like gifting poems to people as gifts. I was writing them down on a piece of paper, fashion beautiful letter paper, with a little, in a little envelope, or putting them in a photo frame and gifting them as gifts. And a time came when I just had certain thoughts and certain lines in my head when I was maybe walking, out and about in town, and I overheard, by complete accident, not that I'm nosy or anything, or I would nature, or I would walk in the forest. Like I used to forage mushrooms with my little, I still do it. Like I done it last year in April when I was when I went to see my parents in Poland. I took my boys, to do some foraging, in for wild mushrooms. That was pretty cool. But nowadays I treat poetry as for healing and actually expressing my emotions, because sometimes people say that teenagers especially find it hard to express their emotion, but I actually that never changes regardless. And you might disagree or agree with me that is because as an adult I still feel that there are some emotions I'm like face to face with someone, but I find it a lot easier piece of paper or like type it on a computer. So
well, I think like expressing emotions and like learning all that, it's a learned skill. Like to learn to feel your feelings and express your feelings and all this stuff. And there's a lot of adults that don't work on that. So yeah, I agree.
I suck at expressing my feelings at all. Like horrible.
So I agree. It's like one of those things I like. Yeah, adults struggle with that too.
So that's kind of why I think I turned into poetry. I always loved that poetry has seemingly no rules. You can literally make, and sometimes they do work. Sometimes they are kind of my personality, really. To those who really know me. Tell you that it suits me, as a form of writing, that the most suited to me and my personality, but I'm not really the one to judge.
No, that's good.
So we have 2 poems from you today. One you personally wrote for us, and then one from your book.
Yes.
Jessica, do you want to read off the words today, or do you want me to?
Okay. I can read them. I have them right here.
Right.
So I will read off the drink words for our listeners out there. There's a couple, so write them down if you don't have a good memory like myself. Okay. Poured, fresh, mouth-watering, raspberry infused, drunk, refreshing, smashed, and booze. So
I'm excited.
Lots of our favorite words, actually. So
Lots of our favorite actions too.
That's good. That's good. Smashed is a very popular word in Scotland, especially with another word called steaming, meaning completely drunk. Like you cannot do anything and you don't remember, how you got drunk. So
we just call that blacking out, I think.
Yeah.
But I think I've lived, in Scotland long enough to actually kind of get used to certain language. When other people visit, even other Polish people, they are like, so what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, you are steaming. It told me, I think in Poland, I learned English like very word. So I understand why some people would go, because word for word, steaming has nothing to do with drinking.
Yeah.
In the context, in the context of partying, probably it does. So.
Wow. We're learning a little bit, we're in Canada, so we have like no culture. So.
You steal that stuff, apparently.
We just steal it. We're a melting pot, apparently.
Is on my bucket list, so I have
Canada. Well, if you come out in our area, let us know, and we'll take you out for a drink. So yeah,
that would be interesting.
Okay, I'm just gonna mute my mic while I'm listening to you read because I don't want to, have my slurping interrupt.
Yes, I'm gonna do the same. I can't wait for this reading.
Yep. So feel free to start and just let us know when you're finished.
So the poem I wrote, acrostics are my favorite form of poetry, and it's titled "Opinionated Lushes." And the way acrostic poems work, each line starts with a letter from the title. So should be able to hear the words, the drink words, and hopefully that. So here it is: opinionated lushes. Overwhelmed with the daily stress, I poured myself incredibly fresh, nurturing, mouth-watering beverage. In my favorite glass, opinions started flowing. Naturally, with the aid of my drink. Always raspberry infused. Terrifically funny, I expressed creatively my inner child, drunk on feel-good, often refreshing stories. Lending my point of view, anxiety of mine kept at bay, smashed on its head, hysterically unique hosts, encouraged me to have good time, drenched in booze, and new bookish memories made. Let me know what you think.
Well, I just chugged half my drink.
That was good.
Oh, that was so sweet, though. I
love it.
I think that's the first time I've heard an acrostic poem. I mean, I haven't really seen an acrostic poem either since I was a child, but it's it flowed really well from what I remember my child brain seeing acrostic poetry. But that was so sweet. That's the first poem written about us. Oh my God.
I will send you in a document, and I will send you the actual poem so you can see, as an acrostic, I'll bold the letters of the title. So.
And are we able to share that on all of our social media? Okay, I just wanted permission. You've heard it here first, folks.
Permission to share it.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you. Well, it was already off to a good start.
All right. And for the second poem, it's in, what's your book called that has your poem in?
I will show you. So that is Scribble, and that is my second poetry collection. And I'm going to read. I'm just the piece of paper in it. Okay. And the poem I'm gonna read is Despair. And yeah, this poem holds a lot of meaning because it's kind of the bridge between the trying to leave the covert narcissist I was mad and not knowing how my future is gonna look like. So it's those words really came to me shortly after I managed to escape. And it reads, Puddle of despair. Swimming in the puddle of despair, I broke chains of your control, crying endlessly. Swimming in the puddle of despair, I freed my soul from the prison of your mind. Anxious. Swimming in the puddle of despair, I threw the dangerous memories of your ego into the unknown sea of forgiveness. Intuitively. Swimming in the puddle of despair, I emerged wearing the flowers of the future forever. So.
Wow.
That was good.
There's a lot of like imagery in there. I'm also a narcissist abuse survivor. So like I feel
I'm currently in that kind of relationship.
Is he right there?
He was right there, yes.
I was gonna say you're calling him out. Oh, she's just kidding.
Yeah, no, my husband's not, but yeah.
But yeah, so is that, has it been healing for you to like write about those experiences?
I think that's where I published my my first poetry book during lockdown in 2020. And I think although I left him in 2012, it wasn't until really about 2017 when I finally ditched the scales and stopped caring about, what people thought about me, and my body shape and I stopped caring what other people think and, kind of tried my best to leave the judgment of others, behind me.
Yeah.
And I took for the very first time, a selfie with me like now with no makeup, just, glasses on my head, which was kind of a very profound moment because up until that point, you would never see me without makeup. Like you would never see me, without my glasses, on my face because I felt ugly. I felt unattractive. I've been told for, I don't even know how long. Like I met him when I was 17 and he was my only boyfriend and then became a husband. So, I've been called any and every name under the sun you can literally think of. And I realized once I started that healing journey and really invested in myself, like the little pockets of time I had, because of course my children at the time were 4 and 8 months. So I really had to make sure that I stay well enough for them. But I kind of, and I found it extremely challenging to look after myself. We struggle as adults to look after ourselves in the best of times, just dealing with the daily stress, daily stresses, never mind, when you deal with experiences like this.
Yeah.
And I was jotting my experiences here and there on a pieces of paper. And some I had saved and just kept them and knew that I have to take them with me. Some were left behind, but it wasn't until really lockdown when the legal proceedings have kind of died down a little, and I could actually see what real impact I had, this all had on me. And I just thought the real therapy wasn't really working, or it wasn't working deep enough for me to kind of get my emotions out. Because I was constantly enraged. I was switching between being in denial, being angry, and then eventually I started laughing about it all. And now I'm in a position that I can actually laugh. And some people would never understand it. How can I laugh from something so serious? But that's because I've been through all these, like 4 kind of different stages of healing. And most of it came through my poetry, because I was, paper would never judge me.
Yeah.
It just accepts anything, anything I've written. It's
that
not
quote, that's amazing. Paper would never judge me. I love that. I love that.
That is an amazing quote, yes.
Yeah.
But that's how I felt. That was my way of telling myself, okay, cool. Maybe that's the way. If, because although therapists, are meant to be impartial, etc., you feel in certain points, like I invested in a program where I was 12 weeks. It was a group coaching program for narcissistic abuse survivors. And I still have access to that program. And it was amazing because I was introduced to EDMR and, rapid, these short, rapid techniques, to kind of switch, and help my brain switch from fight or flight, to kind of, calm down and stuff. And I'm not saying that wasn't useful, but I always felt that it wasn't as personal as I would, as I needed, and paper was, paper or, intuitive drawing, sometimes I was just writing. Mm-hmm. And there are poems which started with just one line. And there is one poem in that book where it took me literally 2 years to write, like to complete. And I was kind of adding bits to it. And I'm thinking, that way it's not finished yet. But I wasn't ready to finish. Like I didn't know the ending. And it's almost as if it's like shows the different stages of me, of me healing. But it's not, I'm still not convinced it's fully finished. But then it doesn't stop me from including it in my next, next poetry book, if I really have to. But yeah, that's that came also with forgiveness. Like very early on, I decided that I forgave him for what he's done to me. But he's never been told that, because with him being covert narcissist, I know he's never gonna care.
Yeah.
And anything I say will just give him the power to control me even more, and like will give him the little tiniest bits of hope that maybe it is indeed the phase, as he used to call it, that's a phase that I just left and I will come back. Strangely, it's been what I left in 2012. We are in 2023, and no, I'm not going back. No chance.
Yeah. It's been over a decade. Are you good?
Yeah.
You're not going back.
Yes. I'm good. There has been plenty of mojitos, and other, vodkas with cranberry
all
juice,
the mojitos,
and other
best
things,
healing,
to aid me, the process of healing. But I think I'm good. I'm at least at the stage where I can talk about it. I can share, my experience. Still have emotions, but different kind of emotions, because these are the emotions now where I can portray them better. I can name them, but I don't get this, anxious feeling anymore. I don't get heart palpitations. I don't get sweat. I don't sweat, at the even slightest thought of him being around me or in a close proximity, and I'm glad that I used poetry and the journey I've been led on. But I can see how much even my 2 books have changed. Like the first one was really, really the deep, like there was a lot of anger, a lot of despair, a lot of, denial and this kind of different, why me, like constant questioning, why me? Why did I let somebody take so much power away from me? Whereas this one, the one which I read the poem from, this one is more showing my journey to rediscover my worth, like loving myself unconditionally, and knowing that, you know what, I am worth a lot more, and I should be celebrated. Even if I celebrate myself, I should be celebrated for who I am, and I should be proud of the achievements. Like I cannot even explain to you the feeling when, I've always wanted to write books. And the moment I held my very first book, which is That's my first book.
Oh, wow.
The moment I
amazing.
held, this first book, seeing my name, because of course I could have used pen name, but I thought, no, I want to use a real name. I want to use my real name so that people, so that I can look back at it and think, you know what, that has been, that is my work, and, I find it incredible. Like, it's incredible to me that I was born in Poland, but I've managed to write 2 books and they are in English. Like,
I was gonna say your English, like I'm assuming English isn't your first language, and it's like so good.
Yeah,
I don't know any other languages. I'm terrible.
See, like, I had opportunities, thanks to my mom, to learn English in extracurricular activities in school or after school. And I had a guy from America and a guy from the US. And then there was a guy from Britain. So I remember when I first arrived in Scotland, people thought, I'm German, because I was just fresh after my, German teaching studies. Although I chose the wrong country, because German in Scotland isn't really popular. So, but still, I still use it. I talk to my German friends, and stuff. And if I really wanted to, I probably would have been able to write a poem in German. I haven't tried it, but, I've written a few in Polish. But I think, like, none of my qualifications are in Polish, because I was studying German. I have 2 diplomas in German and 2 diplomas in English. So it's like, I don't really think, with so many years in Scotland, I really feel Polish, if you know what I mean. I started questioning, am I really Polish, or because it's really, it's one of those things. I think because I've always been surrounded by English, like by those who speak English or speak different languages. And when I first arrived in Scotland, I remember doing, like when you do a post on social media, some people do that. Like, they would do it in their own language, and then they would include a translation. That was before Google Translate was a thing.
Yeah.
I love Google Translate.
Like, I used to do that. There are more than a few posts on my Facebook timeline where I've included an English translation to what I was, talking about. And I'm thinking, no, it's not needed. Because the vast majority of people I had to deal with were, could speak English. So I'm thinking, they surely don't need a translation into Polish,
Yeah.
And, the only people really I speak Polish to are my parents. So, because even my Polish friends, if I'm out and about, especially here, we would rather speak in English. Although I must admit, it's quite funny when, because I can speak German and Polish, when there is Polish people talking, in Polish, and I'm sometimes, like, sometimes you listen and think, would you really talk about this on the bus or like on public transport? Should that not be a private conversation? So yes, there have been a couple of, and some of my poems, like especially those which I gifted to some people, were very comical, because they were, maybe overheard conversations, or like certain quotes and certain phrases they've used. So yeah, it's been,
do you think you'd ever, like, do you write in other languages, or is it strictly in English?
I can write in Polish. I've written more than a few poems in Polish. Maybe not enough to have a book, to publish a book yet. But once I collect at least 100, I probably would publish a book just, purely in Polish. For those of my friends who are actually Polish and don't maybe speak a lot of English,
Yeah.
I've not tried writing in German, but then it's not necessarily, German as a language is quite hard. Although Polish, some people say that Polish is the hardest. It's been always competing with like Mandarin, but To me.
As a Canadian English speaker, all languages are very difficult.
Yeah.
Like, I'm English speaking and I still can't even get my own language correct half the time.
Half the
like,
English speakers here in Canada can't speak English.
Yeah, so you know what?
Just to show you how difficult Polish is as a language, I'll use my flagship example. My flagship example I use with everybody. If anybody tells me that Polish must not be that hard to learn, like in English, when you use preposition, whether you say under the table, in front of the table, above the table, or on the table, the word table never changes. You only change the preposition. In Polish, not only the prepositions are different, but also the way you say table, you say the word table. Depending what preposition you're like, what context you're using, and what preposition comes before the word. And this is what is the hardest for many, for many people who try to learn Polish. And that actually is in other languages. Like, there is one language which is the hardest for me, and I still can't learn it. And I don't think I've tried so many things, including, hiring someone to teach me, and I still can't do it. And that's French.
French?
Yeah, French
really?
is not.
Oh, okay. My husband's not like French. He's Quebecois. Okay, so he's like redneck French, Canadian French, right? But he was born there, so that was his first language. He didn't learn English until he was 16. And we are forced to take French for like up until we're like 14 here. Again, it's bastardized French. It's not real French, but it's still like everything has a gender. I'm like, how do I know if it's a female table? I don't know.
The same is in German, and in Polish. I think it's most European languages for some reason seem to have a gender, because there are some words in Polish where, like, a skirt is, for example, it, but it's a skirt, and you think, or like the moon. I like when here some people call moon hair. Like when they, some of my friends, when they talk about the moon, and and then they don't want to say moon again in the next sentence, they would say hair, and I'm like, huh? Hair? What? Since when? Moon is moon. Moon is moon. You don't really, get, I don't necessarily understand this concept. I never understood it, and I think English, because I've been so used to English, I've spoken this language for the last 17 years, really. 99% of the language I use is English. I think it became natural.
Yeah.
Especially that I don't need to really look at the grammatical English, especially in poetry. Some people will dispute it. Some people say you should have an editor for a poetry book. But then do you really need an editor where there is no rules? Like, novels are different because you've got plots, you've got characters, you've got scenes, But poetry, if you can literally make up your own rules, like don't get me wrong, there are types of poetry like villanelles where are strict. You've got 19 lines and certain rhyming pattern or like certain repetition. I can understand that in those, but that still is, I think it's in some way that could take away either the imaginary or really the emotion, a poet wants to portray. Like, I've always been visual, but until I started really writing, I did not have a real clue that I could portray a certain emotion using words. Like, when I read books, I can very easily imagine the scene, in any book, whether that be a forest or, but I found it quite remarkable when somebody actually told me that they could see, and they could really feel the emotion I portrayed. I'm like, how? It's just bunch of words, but somehow it works. So
yeah. Did you think you would ever do other writing besides poems, or is it strictly poems? That's your wheelhouse.
I think I would say that poetry is the one form I feel most comfortable with, But I've done like my poetry books. What I've done is there are no real chapters, but what I've done, I'll show you. There is prose between, like in the first book, what I've done is I wrote my story using a prose, in a third person. I called her K, just with the initial, my initial.
Mm-hmm.
And just so I can separate them and kind of connect them rather than having a bunch of poems, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of poets do a wonderful job when you can read each poem separately, but then if you read them all like one after the other, you get actually a story.
Yeah.
But I've always thought, because my story is deeply emotional and can be triggering in some way, I thought my poems needed that little extra, description of the actual, background of why did I call the poems like certain years, like 2008 or, like 2012 or 2011 or 2009, or why. Like there are some poems in my second poetry book which I called like soaked, because there was times when I was soaked in sorrow, or I used, or I was smart, like almost like smashed with rejection, because I wasn't really rejected, but I still felt it. So I've just tried to build up a story so that if somebody had no idea about my story, they could still have the understanding that, my poetry makes sense. Mm-hmm. The way I've put them, the way I've grouped them together and, and stuff like that. But I've written, essays merely in school, I've written here and there, blog posts, but poetry is the one thing which I think I can explore, maybe because like I feel most free, if you know what I mean, because I'm the one who is making the rules. If I wanted free verse or acrostic, I can choose what word I can, I can use. Like when I heard about your podcast, I've written that poem a couple of weeks after, I've listened to a few of your episodes. And I've just thought, I'll just leave it, I wasn't even sure if I just send it to you or whether I will use it, on the recording. But yeah.
Yeah, for our listeners out
hear that.
Well, yeah, I was going to say for our listeners out there, be on the lookout for that. That will be posted on our social medias so that you can read it for yourselves.
Yeah, I'll make it so that it's, you can actually read it in a nice way and it's not like, jumbled up and stuff. But, I'll send it to you. That's not a problem.
And I got one more question that we ask pretty much all indie authors that come on this show. Do you have any what's the word? Like any words you would give to any aspiring poetry authors out there? Like someone's just starting out, any advice?
Any advice?
That's the word.
I think there is two pieces of advice really I can give. It's the fact that I really would love us all to bust the myth that poetry has to rhyme. So many people I met in my life were keen on trying poetry. And when I asked them what was the one thing maybe mostly which put them off was, I can't rhyme. And I cannot stress that enough. If you read, I've just read you one of my poems. And I cannot stress enough how unimportant rhyming is, especially if you do free verse, which is the free form of poetry, like free writing. It doesn't have to, it simply doesn't have to rhyme. It can, but it's up to you, and it can be unusual rhyming. It doesn't have to be a certain, you don't have to start with the most complex poetry form. You could just write, And another piece of advice is like, I think it's the quote I've mentioned before. paper, or whether you do it on a piece of paper, which I really like because I can feel the pen. There is something magical, just like with the old-fashioned books, like when you hold them. Whether you do it on a piece of paper or whether you type it on a computer, because you can do that too. It doesn't matter. Or whether you use your phone and the notes app on your phone. It doesn't matter. It's good to remember that paper doesn't judge. Like, you can literally treat it as a brain dump, or a word rampage, and just put your feelings on a paper or type them out. It not only is a great way to kind of alleviate your mood, because sometimes it's all we need, but it's also a great way of, you never know, in a couple of years, you could be, after a couple of years of doing so, or a couple of months, you may actually realize that, what, it is a good material and I can actually try. And maybe one more little tip is, like, don't be afraid to put it out there, because there will be always somebody who needs to hear that message. And it doesn't matter how many people, could be one person. That's how I approach it. Whether I have one book sale or whether I have, one review, or what, this is, starting small is all that matters, so.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's good
That's
advice.
what I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Kat, for coming on and reading
You're
for us,
welcome.
and again, writing a poem about us. I feel like we made it, Dawn.
I know.
We're like famous. Like, what?
We're so
what?
famous now.
And again, you can find all of Kat's link in the link tree there, or sorry, in the, what's it called? The ticker, the banner, in the banner
Instagram
there.
on the banner.
Yeah, the Instagram on the banner, and it will be below in the description of this episode, where you can find her poetry books. Yeah.
It was a pleasure, Kat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and I really enjoyed my time with you, and I cannot wait I cannot wait for all the other episodes which you have lined up. You have gotten yourself a very big fan.
Oh, that is so good to hear.
you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.